Dice are rolling, darkness falls. Inside the GM Studios halls. Tabletop games where nightmares creep. In a realm where sanity is lost and weak. Welcome to the abyss where dreams shatter. Inside the GM studio, nothing else matters. Blood and chaos, the dark arts unfold. In the realm of role-playing, where legends are told.
Boopity boopity boo. Welcome to the side quest episode of Inside the GM Studio, where we field questions from the internet. I am your host, David.
I'm Matt.
Do the rolly dewey thing. We're on the die. I get a 16, and Matt's going to give me a question, and we're going to answer it sight unseen.
All right. This one comes from John Bob 19 on RS Game Masters with the title, Planning My First Horror One-Shot, Looking for General Advice. Hold on, let's clear the airways here.
You have lots of horrors. Tons and tons of horrors.
So many horror one-shots.
Yeah.
All right. I've been part of a homebrew campaign for about 5 years, and for a special occasion, I'm going to be DMing a one-shot. I haven't DM'd before, so for a system, I'm just going to use a dumbed-down version of the homebrew system. Okay. The general theme of the one-shot will be fairy horror. Think humans lost in a magical land with mythical creatures who may or may not be trusted or deadly. Some of the things that are hanging me up as a first-time DM. Bullet point 1. There are a lot of players. Our current campaign is pretty massive. 11 players with a very, very experienced DM. So I'm thinking I'll split it into 2 one-shots with like 5 players in each. Likely a similar story, but different monster encounters. Since it is a horror one-shot and a special occasion, I want it to be high stakes, like big consequences for failed rolls. I'm trying to figure out how to make this work in a way that doesn't feel like it's punishing players for being active rather than passive. I'm thinking of having consequences for failed actions you take be less negative than consequences for failed reactions. I also want to have players have a way of coming back after death, but if they do, altered in a significant way, but it's kind of a loose idea overall, and I'd be happy to hear suggestions. Planning time for everything. This group usually does around 4-hour sessions, but I'm not sure how much to have planned in advance. To not have the session too short or too long, especially in a way that gives a satisfying start and end to the one-shot. Really, any first-time one-shot DM tips are great. All right.
Okay.
If you would like, Dave, we can go right down the bullet points if you want, or you can go ahead and start us off. What you think?
No, yeah, let's go. No, yeah. One of my favorite phrases. No, yeah.
All right. Bullet point number 1. There are a lot of players. Our current campaign is pretty massive. Fucking 11 players. Jesus Christ. But they usually have a very, very experienced DM. So I'm thinking I'll split it into 2 one-shots with like 5 players in each. Likely a similar story, but different monster encounters.
Yeah, don't run anything with 11 players. Ever.
Yeah, that is
full
rough.
stop. Like, even just trying to conceptualize what that is like is going to make your fucking head spin. 11 players is ridiculous. Building encounters for 11 players would just be fucking ludicrous. Not to mention the role-playing aspect of it. Nobody, even just the most arbitrary thing is going to take fucking forever. Like, an encounter that challenges 11 players has to be so big in scope that that's your whole session right there.
Yeah.
One combat. That's it. 11 players. It's going to take 3 hours to get through one fight or more, likely. I don't really know what he means by homebrew system. What is that? I don't know what that is. So, yeah, don't do that. Your better bet would be to split up to split up the group into two smaller, more manageable groups, and have there be some overlapping narrative. Maybe one group is starting on one end of the continuum, and the other group is starting on the other end of the continuum, like one end of the forest and the other end of the forest, and then they're both trekking toward the center of the forest.
Hmm.
That might be worthwhile. This is a one shot, he said, right?
Yeah, it's what he's saying. It's just a horror one shot.
Yeah, you really need to curate the players that are involved in the one shot. You can't have an 11 player one shot. You just can't. There's
No,
just no time.
no,
Unless
especially if
you're
you're
gonna
only going to be playing for 4 hours.
Yeah, no way.
No way.
12 hours, maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe you could have a 11 player one shot in a 12-hour session. Um, but you just need to run two separate one shots for a more manageable size
Yeah,
group.
I'll tell
So,
you from experience. The very first time I ever did any GMing at Gen Con, I did my first year of doing it. I fucked up. I took a job volunteering for Green Ronin and for Chaosium, and at Green Ronin, they asked me to do Fantasy Age, and they asked me, "How do you feel about tables of a lot, a big tables of players?" And I was thinking, "Oh yeah, sure, that's fine. Like 6, 7 people, that's totally cool." No, my first game was 12 people, and our game was 5 hours. And I'll tell you what, it was hell. It was
yeah.
hell. I hated it, and I had to do 2 of those. They asked me if I would do 2 for 12 players, and it was
It's
horrible.
Nope, I would say no more than 7. 7, and I'm a pretty experienced DM. And you have to be more like Mean Daddy when there's that many players. You kind of have to be. You have to be more of a disciplinarian. No, 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 no. I'm sorry. It's not your turn to talk. Matt, what is your character doing? Right? You have to be more like that. You have to manage the fucking table, especially if these people don't all know each other like they would
Yeah.
at a con. They wouldn't know, and they'll just be like, "Blah, I'll just jump in there." It's like, no, you won't. You'll talk when I tell you to talk.
Yeah.
And so with 11 players, especially if they know each other, it's going to get out of control. It's going to get out of control. And if you're a new DM, just don't do it. Don't set yourself up to fail because the players will run over you. Like if there's 11 of them, it just will. So hopefully that addresses that, which
Yeah.
is like, oh, we're back to the community questions where we say, don't do that.
Yeah.
Like,
I know.
we didn't have one of those in a
It's
while.
nice.
Don't do that.
Back home. Yeah, don't
It's
do
the
that.
member berries.
Yeah, if you would like, do the two groups. Great, fantastic. And I like the idea of similar story but different monster encounters. Possibly the same goal, just different paths getting there. Like David said, great idea.
Yeah.
Bullet point number 2. Since it is a horror one shot and a special occasion, I want it to be high stakes, like big consequences for failed rolls. I'm trying to figure out how to make this work in a way that doesn't feel like it's punishing players for being active rather than passive. I'm thinking of having consequences for failed actions you take be less negative than consequences for failed reactions. I also want to have players have a way of coming back after death, but if they do, altered in a significant way, but it's kind of loose idea overall, and I'd be happy to hear suggestions.
Okay, I mean, no offense here, buddy, but you're kind of talking out of both sides of your mouth here. You want to have a mechanic for them coming back? Okay, well then automatically it's less high stakes. If there's no such thing as final death, then you want to be able to nerf that. That definitionally is not as high of stakes as if they're just dead. They're dead. That's what it means. Is that there's some permanency to the consequences. So
There was one thing I was thinking of when I read that, and even like old chef there in the chat, in our Twitch chat right now said, have him lose a limb instead of final death. But what I thought of was what David does in our campaign. We have lingering injuries whenever we drop to 0 hit point or when we go unconscious from 0 hit points from damage. We get these things called lingering injuries now, and they can be kind of brutal, depending on what David decides on. The one that you just gave Cody our last session, because of his concussion or whatever it was,
fractured skull.
fractured skull. That's what it was. Yeah, but either way, it's kind of a brutal thing that he's going to have to deal with until he can do. And now that we're getting higher in levels, David is saying we need higher restoration spells in order for us
Yeah, he
to
got
get him
hit
clear.
in the head with a fucking Giants club and it
Yeah,
knocked him
no, I'm not
unconscious.
saying
It's like,
it's wrong. I'm all for it.
it's
I think it's great.
so that's a way to take the edge off, but it wouldn't be as um it wouldn't be as dramatic as or as high stakes as if he just died. But that said, the lingering injury mechanic that I've put in is a way of like consequencing you for falling unconscious,
Mm,
that which isn't there normally. So it's actually higher stakes in that regard, and that's because I've softened some of the rules that make it more difficult for you to die. And so I'm like, okay, if you're more difficult for you to die, then when you get knocked unconscious, there's going to be a stronger consequence. But to the original point, I mean, I understand what it is that he's saying. He doesn't want to punish players doing things.
right.
So the way to have something be high stakes and harsh consequences is he's already kind of on that path a little bit, which is when the players take bold, decisive actions, make it easier for them to succeed. And when they hem and they haw and they plan and they're reluctant and they kind of are passive and they sit on their hands and they're being overly cautious, punish them harshly. Punish them really harshly. They come up to a door, they don't know whether they want if they just go, "Hey, we're in pursuit of a bad guy and like he's ran down this hall and this is the only door." I just rush up to the door and I kick it open and I throw myself into the fray with my weapon in hand. Make that go well for them in the ways that it can. And if they move up to the door and they go like, "Well, hang on, I keep my distance from the door. What does the door look like?"
Yeah.
I'm going to try to do a perception check and I creep up as quietly as I can with a stealth check and look through the keyhole and they're just like, let's just I'm going to move a little bit back and discuss things with my party so we can strategize or do whatever. Like, yeah, a guillotine trap just swipes down the fucking hallway and cuts you in half,
Yeah.
right? Like you're
Hell, I've had it
subtextually
before.
communicating to them that inaction is bad.
Yeah, I've had players say, "I just want to crack open the door and take a look in," and and it's supposed to be a very high tension time. They crack open the door, and I say that the hinges squeak and squeal as you can hear the shuffling of chairs inside as a bow draws back, and they're just, "I just cracked the door open." I was like, "Yeah, that's all it takes. There's not much.
Do you think monsters are just sitting around oblivious? Like, yeah, they want to be, "Oh, I want to get more information. I want to crack the door open and peek inside." Okay, great. Well, the monsters inside now know that you're there, and they're going to adjust accordingly, which
Yeah,
means this encounter is going to be much more difficult for you because and I'm not saying one is better than the other. There is a time for caution and there is a time for throwing caution to the wind.
hmm,
Depending on what sort of style of game you want, a horror game might be one where you want the players to be a little fucking apprehensive
yeah,
and cautious. If the stakes are high, then you need to just figure out some ways to subtextually communicate to them the way you want them to navigate the world. Do you want them to be cautious and thoughtful? Do you want them to be bold and brazen? Um, if you want them to be cautious and thoughtful, then make them make them aware that they have to move forward in the plot,
hmm,
and that if they don't, the consequences will be far worse than if they do. But then consequence them very hard for missteps. If they're being impractical, then just you need to allow those consequences to play out. You need to avoid the instinct to insulate the players from the consequences of their choices. But the consequences of their choices and the tenor of that will be set by you setting the tone. A horror game is all about tone and atmosphere. And if you've done that right, the players will have a pretty good idea of the things that are in bounds and the things that are out of bounds. They step out of bounds, consequence them harshly. If they're in bounds, try to reward it in whatever small way you can. I would say that a horror game is not going to be necessarily lots of like heroic, bold action because that kind of is not really in keeping with the spirit. So to keep the dread taut, make present them with two options. One, an option that you can do something, and if you choose wrong, it could go horrible. And if you choose right, it might go okay. And then
Mm.
the alternative is to be overly whatever, to do nothing, and it will certainly go horrible. Like, so like that's the options you want, where it's like the players need to feel forced into a choice and be aware that one of those choices could be very, very bad. And then you get like that sense of dread and that sense of tension that they need to act, but if they misstep, it could go very poorly.
Mm. I want to know what you think about this, David. So, Chef in the chat here about the resurrection in a horror game. He
Hmm.
says, meh, a resurrection in a horror one shot? Nah. Maybe have
Yeah.
a mechanic where their ghost can have a single action where they can impose advantage on an ally or disadvantage on an enemy. So that keeps them in the game, technically. But
Well,
it's
here's
not
the thing:
exactly.
is if you're dead set on having 11 players in one group, make it really easy for them to die. And when they're dead, just fucking get out of
Yeah,
my game, right?
go home.
Yeah, go home, right? And that'll create a very competitive atmosphere. Whereas, I'm with him. Uh, Resurrection in a one shot horror game is like really seriously like just that's at odds with you saying that they want to have you want there to be stakes. It's like, well, obviously you don't because you want them to be able in a one shot to come back into a game instead of just having them die and be like, all right, well, just log off Discord there, buddy. You
Yeah.
know, like um you so many times we hear this where it's like, I don't want it to be, I want to challenge the players, um, but I'm worried it'll be too hard. It's like, okay, so then you don't want to challenge the
Yeah.
players. Like that's what it is trying to give them something that's too hard that might seem like it's too hard and see how they deal with it. So um, just be clear, pick a lane. Stop trying to do a King Solomon and split the baby here. Pick challenging or um, survivable,
Mm.
and they're just going to have trade-offs. You're going to undermine the own sense of dread in a horror game if you nerf the stakes. So,
All right, last bullet point, planning time for everything. This group usually does about 4 hour sessions, but I'm not too sure how much to have planned in advance to not have the session too short or too long, especially in a way that gives a satisfying start and end to a one shot. This is one is this one's a little more difficult because for what you want to do a horror one shot. First of all, for a one shot, you should have some good stuff planned. You've already talked about this is like a, for a special occasion, this is a special homebrew, whatever the fuck. You should have quite a bit planned for this one to make it special. Not 11 people special, but at least enough to have your bases covered.
I'm special.
And when it comes to horror games, I think there's a little bit more planning that has to be done. You got to add in a little extra, maybe for just some notes on how to keep, like David keeps saying, you got to keep that tension. You got to keep that going. You got to keep the, like oh God, what am I thinking of here? That,
Uh,
I don't know what I'm talking about. The ambiance.
yeah.
You want to be able to keep that ambiance going on. That the dread, the horror is still there. It's still something that you have to worry about, no matter what portion of the game you're in. And with that, you got to give yourself little notes here and there to tell you, make sure you say this, make sure you add this into the game at this point, in order for the players to get that little shock that they need to making sure that they're still keeping on their toes, that they're on the edge of everything for the game.
Oh. So yeah, I would okay, so a 4 hour session, I would say you're likely going to be, if it's a horror game, you're likely going to be talking a lot, giving atmosphere and mood. So here's how I would structure it. You need some sort of intro that is likely exposition, giving the players some sense of the plot, sense of the mood, the tone, and whatever, subtextually communicating to them what you expect of them. Most of us can't talk for more than 10 or 15 minutes at a time, so that section should be short and sweet, but is essential to setting the stage. Then you turn the narrative over to the reins of the players to allow them to interact with the world that you've set forth in a low stakes way. That section of the plot should be just enough for you to get a sense of who the characters are, how they're likely to navigate the plot, as well as to give texture to their characters so that the drama of the plot plays out in a way that's resonant with them and resonant with the other characters. That should only take maybe 20, 25 minutes. It might even just be some small talk with the characters, or they're doing something, some sort of trail of breadcrumbs that you've laid out before them. Then you hit them with an inciting incident. So the inciting incident is the incident that's going to kick off the domino effect of the plot. So it could be an unexpected visitor, it could be the discovery of a body, it could be a fight breaks out, it could be getting some bombshell information, whatever the culmination of the plot is. This should be the thing that kicks it off and gets the players, also known as an adventure hook. So an inciting incident would be external to the players but involves the players in the plot. That should be happening within the first half an hour of your game. Certainly within the half an hour, ideally like the first 15 to 20 minutes. So then once you have that inciting action, then you need to have, I would say, at least 3 points of rising action, where the stakes are raised, and at least one of those rising actions should be some sort of plot twist, where there's a complication and the players need to adjust to it. Somebody isn't who they thought they were, and something isn't where they thought it was. It's just something that takes the plot in a new direction, to subvert their expectations. So 3 points of rising action, with the players being able to interact with those at an increasing clip. Then give them a sense of what the final confrontation is likely to be. Once the rising action has reached a crescendo, then you get to the denouement, as they call it, which is the climax of the plot. That should culminate in some sort of final confrontation with some bad guy or something to that effect. And then maybe with 5 minutes at the end of the session for an epilogue, although if it's a horror-themed game, an epilogue might be inappropriate. It should probably end with some sort of bleak and horrible outcome where the epilogue is just forecasting how terrible the events of the narrative are going to wreak havoc on all of humanity, and then just cut to black. That is probably going to fill out your 4 hours. I would follow that structure pretty closely.
I'm going to add in a few little tricks that you can do that some people might think are a little shit, but I think they're fun because David used to do this to us all the time when we played in person. Where atmosphere is everything, and you do want to keep the players, the tension going, one thing that you can do is, like David would go, "Oh yeah, what was your passive perception?" And then he would roll some dice and be like, "Okay," and then that was it. And he really had nothing. There was nothing that was around us. He just did that so that we would be like, "Well, what the fuck? What happened? I want to do a perception check now." He's like, "No, there's nothing. Don't worry about it."
Read this note and pass it back to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Shit like that. That's really good. I know a lot of people can't do it these days because they play on VTTs, but if you play on Discord with real dice, or hell, maybe if you do, you just ask, "Oh yeah, what was your passive perception there?" And then you look over and, Okay, interesting. And
Yeah.
then they're just like, well, what does that mean? What is a, what's happening? Well, nothing. It's fine. Don't worry about it. It's dark. You see nothing. It's fine.
Just yeah, just iterate. Like, what was your passive perception? 13. Okay. Well, what? Passive perception 13? Yeah. Nothing. What do you mean? Should have invested more in that stat, bro.
Yeah. It's the little things like that that you can do that you just fuck with, not the characters, but the players. You just fuck with
The
them
players.
a little bit. And it keeps them, it gives them in that same, that same sense that their characters might be in.
It's a role playing device.
It is, yeah.
It's a role playing lever that you pull as a GM because in a situation where the characters should be anxious, it's if there's a disconnect between the player and the character, then that doesn't come through. But if you make the player anxious, they'll play the character in a way that's anxious and cautious and whatever. They can't help it, right? Like they just go, that they're a vehicle for this character. It's not likely to be like. I mean, there's a reason that like you're like, oh, my character is really headstrong and confident and has a silver tongue, but I don't. And it's like, well, good luck playing a character like that. You can lean on your stats, but you're never going to be the kind of guy that like is talking a bunch if you're just a real reticent dude, like or gal. So yeah, you make the player if you're trying to make the characters anxious and nervous, make the players like anxious and nervous, and it'll resonate through that way. So,
All right. I think that's going to bring us to the end of this one. I've got nothing else to add on to this. How about you, David? Nope. All right. Well, then we're just going to call this one a good night.
and good luck.